And just to let you know that we do record these meetings mostly for people who can't make them and so they can catch up. We do also put them on the YouTube channel. So if it's on speaker view, so if you don't say anything, you're not going to be on camera. But if you do want to say something and you don't want to be identified, you can just black your screen or whatever like that. I have to say, the people who are watching the videos at the moment are people within our community. It's not like going viral or anything. And we are actually looking at ways, and thank you, Ray and Mac and Ruben, for being part of this process. But we are looking at ways of developing videos that are more targeted to people who are just coming into or exploring uh, Bethany community theology for the first time. They're just so we're looking at creating and developing more shorter videos that are more targeted to that audience. So anyway, that's just a disclaimer to the people who are new tonight.
Okay, so we're in chapter 5 of Mark's Gospel, and we do numerous different studies, and we've done the book of Revelation, and we've done John's Gospel, and we did a kind of free-floating study, the Wayfaring God, things like that. But we went back to Mark's Gospel because it's the first of the Gospels. It's the proto-gospel according to scholarship, even though it's kind of second in the order in the New Testament. In the New Testament, they gather things by length. Often Romans is first of the Paul's epistles because it's the longest. That's certainly one reason why it's there first. But everybody, not everybody, but most scholars agree that Mark is the first, and there's got a lot of evidence of that. It's much more narrative strong. There's little developed teaching in it as such, and the narrative bounces along at 100 miles an hour, and you just feel like the writer, he had to get this material out, and he basically had a scroll on which to do it, and he just wrote it just straight out, and it has that kind of a remarkable freshness of the first of something. And I think that's one reason why we went back to it, because of that freshness within the Roman world. And that's the kind of a very strong presupposition or premise of the study, that Mark is written out of the Roman world, probably out of Rome itself. And so the sense, the feeling that with which we approach the text is that this is a group of Christians in the very first decades of Christianity, third or fourth decade of Christianity, within a violent pagan world. And those two terms go very well together, violence and paganism, because there was nothing to hold it back. Human beings are violent. We know that. They resort to violence very quickly. When you go to school, if you get through school days without a fight, that's a miracle in itself. Is that someone picking on you, or you were victimized or something or other? It's just common experience of human beings, this violence and brutality. And if there isn't any religious restraint, then it's going to be right out there in the open. And I say religious because, of course, Buddhism and Islam and Hinduism, they have rules that do, to some degree, restrain behavior and limit the possibilities of violence, but they don't exclude it by any means. And Roman culture, Roman society didn't have that. and they had the gladiatorial games at the time Christianity was emerging. They had numerous wars. They had the legions, about, I don't know, 20 legions or so, with which they dominated the world. The legion was this supreme instrument of violence. It was highly trained, highly efficient. As Josephus, the historian, said, the exercises of the legions were like wars, and their wars were like exercises. So you get a sense of how organized they were and how efficient and they were, and they dominated the world for 600 years or more. And Christianity comes into this exist in this sphere of life, following a leader who was crucified and did not retaliate. And so the first of the Gospels, Mark, I think bears a lot of the atmosphere and the kind of almost the taste and the smell of what it would have been like to be Christians in the third decade of Christianity in a world that was inherently and openly violent. And the first major episode that we saw after the initial healings and repeated reports of Jesus casting out demons, and the high rate or instance of demons in Mark's gospel at the beginning, that's a signal of violence in the air. A demon, the way we understand it, is someone who has internalized in their own lives the contextual prevailing violence, so that they turn it against themselves in some way. And of course, we know that these days as mental illness of psychosis of some sort, and they didn't have that terminology back then, but they had the phenomenon, and the Gospel of Mark is full of that phenomenon right from the get-go. And that's one of the reasons why the reading we do claims that it's written in the context of a sense of pervasive violence in the community, both in Rome, but then earlier in Jesus' own experience in Palestine in the years leading up to 30, when he was executed. That the Roman troops were there. They've been there since for about 90 years. Since Pompey conquered Jerusalem. And that was the first time they'd had that extended presence of foreign troops, kind of unbeatable troops on their land ever. I mean, they were invaded and they were conquered, and they were garrisoned shortly for short periods previously, but not that extended presence of the imperial Roman army. And so the sense of the kind of intrusive, controlling violence of the world had never impacted them like it was in the time of Jesus. So when it says Jesus came in the fullness of time, it's not that God was hanging around deciding when he was going to send his son so we could get saved. No, it's because it's that the message was really needed at this point in time. This was the crisis moment for Judaism, and that's why Jesus came. Cometh the hour, cometh the man, and that's exactly what happened. And so we have it in Palestine. We have the pervasive presence of violence in Palestine, and then of course in Rome. So we have these demoniacs, and then the first major story that we had, extended story, was the what is known as the Gerasene demoniac in chapter 5. And Jesus very deliberately goes across the water. He crosses the Sea of Galilee. And we saw that as a physical metaphor for crossing beyond Israel to the pagan world, and he does. He goes to the Decapolis, which is a region established by the Romans under 10 cities, 10 Romanized, Hellenized cities, of which Gerasa was one, and Gadara was another, and those two names are given to the region in the text in the gospel. So Jesus goes into the violent Roman world, and he heals this man, whom he meets when he gets out of the boat, directly out of the boat. He heals this man of a legion. And we have argued that legion means exactly what it says. It doesn't mean many, as Mark glosses it in the text. And the reason why he glosses it is pretty evidently he doesn't want to draw opposition from Roman authorities who think his text is subversive and anti-Rome in some fashion. So he glosses the name legion with "for we are many," and that has entered the popular language as his you can say his problems are legion or his friends are legion. We use it as a metaphor of many, but actually its original meaning at the time of Mark could not have been mistaken as the supreme engine of Roman violence. And Jesus heals this man of that, and he tells him to go off and preach the message of what the Lord has done for him in the rest of the cities. He's not just to go home, he's to become an evangelist, which we argued last week was actually a covert way of saying, or no, a double, a kind of a two-level way of talking, because he was talking about the man in his time, that is the time of Jesus, but then also the gospel and the missionaries of the gospel at the time in the writing of the gospel itself, Mark's gospel, that you are to go and tell the people of the Gentile cities about the what the Lord has done for you. So it's enormously exciting if you look at it, if you approach the story this way. I mean, this is the gospel being let out of the bottle. It's the first time, and we're so used to it. We're so used to Christianity as being a religion, like we're talking about, established religion. No, there's no religion back then. There was no religion of Christianity for a long time. What there was the gospel. And people prepared to talk about it, preach it, and risk their lives for it. Why? Because it meant something so immensely better than what they were experiencing and living at the time. And the case of the demoniac illustrates that. You've got to think about the number of soldiers in the Roman Empire and the way in which territory was colonized by giving ex-legionaries who'd spent, survived the battles, I don't know, who've been fighting for 20, 30 years, they were given land. And that's the original meaning of paganus. It's land given to a colony of soldiers. It doesn't mean people who worship the devil or worship rural gods. It just means people who live in a colonized rural area and which they're going to develop as farms. And in fact, when I was in Italy, I lived in Italy for a year. The place where I lived, Spello, was an original paganus settlement for Roman soldiers. It was originally pagan in that sense. And of course, because Christianity was a religion of the cities, it spread first in the cities, that then afterwards the people in the pagan regions, in the rural regions, were known as non-Christians, and they had the message had to reach out to them, because Christians immediately flourished by bringing the word to the city. And the word, as I say, is, if you think about the number of soldiers and men, one way or another, involved in violence, in military, or being slaves or whatever, if Jesus sets this individual free from what we would call today his what do they call it? I forgot the word now. The trauma, the post-traumatic stress. That's right. Sets the individual free from that, which is obviously a real thing. It happens all the time today, and you meet people and you know people who have it. That if Jesus was able to set someone free from that, because why? Because he introduces this totally new relationship in the world, in history. He introduces it to this individual simply by a touch, or by a word, or by his presence. I mean, that's the gospel. That's how it worked. It's not rocket science in its way. I mean, it's very simple. That Jesus introduces this radically new thing of peace in yourself, peace with the other, of non-rivalry, of non-hostility to the other. And the story of the demoniac in chapter 5, after the initial healings, and then after the chapter 4 on the parables, it just builds such a powerful scene. It's the first really extended narrative, and it builds such a powerful narrative of this man sitting at Jesus' feet, clothed and in his right mind, where before he was howling all night, bruising himself with stones, living among the tombs, out of his head. And Jesus brings peace and consolation to this guy's soul. Now that's not just a pretty story. That is a therapy, a profound therapy in the world that Jesus was bringing, and that Mark, the evangelist, writing about the year 65, 66, 67, something like that, was reporting. So that's what we did last week. And so that's kind of by way of bringing us up to speed. But now Jesus comes back to the other side again. It's always now, from now on, the other side. He doesn't come back to Galilee or Judea or his homeland. He just comes back to the other side. Jesus is always going to the other side, the side of the other. And he comes back to the other side and he heals 2 women. One, I'd say, I don't know, in her late 20s, something like that. And the other, a young girl, 12 years old. And the number 12, they have the number 12 in common, and we'll think about that. And they have their status as women in common. And I think it's not by accident. I don't think anything in the gospel is written by accident. I think the writers are all, in their way, excellent writers. And the thing is structured in an intentional way. So you've just dealt with the intense violence of the man whose demonic name was Legion. Or you've been over the other side and dealt with that. Now you're coming back and you're going to deal with 2 women. And those stories are parallel. They're situated on either side of the Lake of Galilee, which is the kind of depth, the immensity, the abyss. And they're all to do with violence. as we'll see. And why is it that you, directly after a demonized man, you have two women with women's issues? A question of what it is to be a woman. And I think that the setting up of the gospel by Mark is intentional, because his community would have reached out to traumatized men and to dehumanize women. And that you'd have a picture there of the original Christian community in Rome in the year 65. And that's where the gospel's getting its start. There's no episcopal structure yet. I mean, there are leaders and they're appointed leaders, but there's not this sense of hierarchy, of this kind of network of ordained men. Not that it's not there at all. What you have is the reality of human life and the message reaching out into the very pith and core of that life. And so we're going to look at the story of these two women, and we'll read chapter 5, verse 21 through to the end of that section, verse 43. So we're in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 5, 21 to 43. If someone could read that. And hi, Andrew.
I can read it.
Thank you.
So when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, came, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." So he went with him. And a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhage for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, for she said, "If I but just touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone from him, Jesus turned around about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" But he looked all around to see who had done it. The woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was about 12 years of age. At this, they were overcome with amazement. he strictly ordered them that no one should know this and told them to give her something to eat.
Give her a sandwich and a glass of
Mm.
milk. So that's the story. And as you see, there's two women involved, and the stories are intertwined. Do you have any immediate reactions to the way those two stories go together? I mean, those two women. I mean, I call the girl. I mean, it's just for convenience. I call her a woman. She's she's a young girl. She's just on the edge of womanhood. But I'll call, just to talk about women, I'll call them women. So, do you have a react? What is your any initial reaction to the way those stories are woven together and given to us directly after the other story of the demonized Legion man?
And you still get that sense of the chaos that seems to follow Jesus in Mark. You know, the crowd is pushing in on him and pressing in, and you sort of had that sense of this sort of whirlwind that's surrounding him all the time. And I mean, the woman with the issue of blood obviously is outcast and on the fringes of society, whereas the daughter of the leader of the synagogue is not that, but dying. So I don't know.
Yeah, there's that. She is dying. She's on her way out.
Mm. But we said that they're both helpless.
They're both helpless. Yes.
Yes. Mm.
Yes. So these two women are helpless. And as you say, Linda, there's this sense of the commotion around you. There's the crowd. It's amazing. And he's this calm center in the middle of the crowd. Claire.
And also from that confusion of the crowds, Jesus focuses on the particulars. It's almost like, people who counsel people with mental health now, you get them to concentrate on concrete steps. And the way he reported this, you can sort of see it as Jesus turning around, focusing just on the woman, doing that little bit.
Yeah.
So it calms down in a very concrete, specific manner.
Very good. Yeah, that's right. That is very true. It's very concrete. It's not abstract. It's very concrete. Thank you. Gail.
Well, hands. Hands are mentioned in both episodes more than once. And healing touch, that idea of the Jairus saying, just put your hands on her and she will be healed. And then the woman reaching out and touching his garment, and he feels energy coming out from him.
Mm.
And then he goes and really doesn't he lay hands and
He takes her by the hand. He takes her hand.
by the hand.
Yeah.
Now, what that means, it just seems to me it's such a physical, bodily thing.
Yeah, and the hand is a very expressive organ. I mean, apart from the face, the hand is probably the most expressive part of our bodies. And go ahead.
I mean, I was just going to say that the whole thing of women and like the menstruation and the girl being 12 on the
very edge
verge
of
of, yeah, that's adolescence. 12 is kind of considered that age. So I don't know what the meaning of that is, but there's some
I mean,
connection in that way.
she's at the borderline. She's just facing womanhood, and you have instances of I mean, that's could be overreading. You have instances of adolescent girls or boys just refusing, not wanting to grow up, because the challenge of being an adolescent, a human being who's got to take responsibility for their lives in this world. So it's a very challenging time for her. Gail.
Well, I just wanted to add, I just kept thinking of some, for instance, in the Dalits in Hinduism are untouchable. What happens when you touch somebody you're not supposed to touch? And
yeah, right.
A Jewish man was not supposed to touch a woman, especially one who was menstruating.
Oh, yeah.
Or what about a dead body?
Yeah,
If you thought the person was dead. So
right.
Jesus is really pushing the limits in so
It's
many.
it's very much pushing the limits, and that's, I think, part of the parallel with demoniac. The the demoniac is very much a limit on the limits character. I mean, he lives in the tombs. He does not belong to society. This woman, the first woman, she is in the same position for different reasons, but very much the same position, but actually in some ways the same reasons ultimately when we look at it. And the young girl is on the edge of being in that situation. She could be brought back to into normal community, but she's very much on the edge. She's in the terror, really, the terrifying borderline. I mean, that's the way I would read it, that she's emerging into womanhood, and it's very, very difficult for her. And Jesus, so this is kind of leaping towards the end, but when Jesus takes her by the hand and he says, little girl, get up, he's welcoming her into another mode of being that frees her from her terror. I mean, that I'm maybe overreading a little bit, but there's no doubt about it. He frees her from death. So in order to understand this better, let us go to the texts, these terrible texts.
Tony, can I make a comment?
Go ahead, Ruben.
Yes, it was I didn't find it as a similarity, but something dissimilar was that the woman with the hemorrhage, she sought Jesus and she was looking to be healed by him.
Mhm.
Whereas the girl is sick or dead, and others on their behalf, on her behalf, have Jesus intervene.
Mhm.
But in any case, it's Jesus who does
That's right.
healing.
And those situations, I mean, Jesus takes the initiative with a demoniac because the guy says, "Why are you come to
Right.
threaten us?" He comes toward, although the demoniac actually, it could be him antagonizing Jesus. But anyway, he reads Jesus as coming to him. But then, as you say, the woman goes to Jesus, and then Jesus definitely goes to the girl, and in quite a very kind of private way. He drives everybody away, so it becomes very, very selective towards her. So yeah, so these are encounters, very, very direct encounters between these people and Jesus. Go ahead.
And then there's something about the crowd and the
Yeah,
way it almost appears like a quick frame story. The woman with the hemorrhage is the little girl is it starts the story of where his
yeah,
journey begins. But then there's the woman in the crowd that through the crowd is as a vehicle for anonymity
yep.
because she knows she's not going to be able to be exposed or allowed.
She thinks so
That,
anyway.
yeah, she needs anonymity. And then then the miracle occurs.
Yeah,
Then Jesus continues to create another miracle with the little girl.
right. And he creates another miracle with the woman because he brings her out of her anonymity. She just wanted to be healed.
Yeah, and actually, she exposed herself by falling at his feet.
Yeah, he demands an answer, and she takes responsibility, so she does. Yes, they begin a relationship. I mean, it's wonderful. So now let us go
Ray
to.
has his hand up as
Oh,
well.
sorry. Okay, Ray.
Well, you had something to say, Tony. I just was going to
No,
mention
no,
that
go ahead.
I was just going to mention that in all three cases there was no real great help from organized religion. The authorities didn't have much they could do for the menstruating woman or the guy that was among the graves, and they wrote off the young girl as gone, and Jesus said she
Mm,
was. So.
You're right. There's nothing that organized religion could do, or humanity can do. I mean, humanity has done what it does. exclude in the first two instances. That's what it does. That's the way it works. And Jesus inverts that. He overturns that, which is this miracle of the gospel. I mean, that's the miracle, is overturning those exclusions and those prohibitions that by which we work in order to deal with violence. I mean, that's the way we, I mean, like the Girardian thing is, we have these prohibitions because that's the only way we can deal with violence. That's the only way we can wall it off in ordinary life. We're not in war, but in ordinary life, we wall it off so that we have at least some kind of safe zone in which to live. Jesus disrupts that, opens it up. It's an incredible revolution. So, Cheryl.
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me. Sometimes I have trouble on Zoom, but
No, you just wave. You're good.
okay. But you can hear me.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you.
So, I mean, this story seems to me about the women that these are women who are infertile, and they are brought into fertility. The woman who has spent 12 years hemorrhaging is that she has spent 12 years in infertility. And the girl is dying before she can become fertile. And so I think that the fertility is an important thing to think about here, especially coming, because the stories of men, often you will have the blind be healed or the lame will walk, but the woman is healed of hemorrhaging. It's a different kind of healing. And the girl is healed at the time of which she was going to die before she ever could become fertile. And so it's in some way, which I would have to think about more, this is a story about life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No doubt about it. And they're from now on, those women, the young girl and the older women are brought in to fertility. Not just they're able to bear children, but they're able to give life to other people in the same situations as them, or to open up that space where their death will not prevail. So they become fertile in more ways than one. So now, yeah, let's look at Leviticus chapter 12, verses 1 to 8, and then chapters 15, 19 to 30. Now, I don't want you to be too scandalized by this. It is scandalous in its way, but that's only because Jesus's intervention 2,000 years has flipped our mindset on one level anyway, on one level. We hope that it can flip our mindsets in more ways than this. But let us begin at Leviticus 12, 1 to 8, if someone could give us that. Hi, Laura.
I can read it.
Thank you.
The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the people of Israel, saying, if a woman conceives and bears a male child, she will be ceremonially unclean 7 days. As at the time of her menstruation, she shall be unclean. On the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. Her time of blood purification shall be 33 days. She shall not touch any holy thing or come into the sanctuary until the days of her purification are completed. If she bears a female child, she shall be unclean 2 weeks, as in her menstruation. Her time of blood purification shall be 66 days. When the days of her purification are completed, whether for a son or for a daughter, she shall bring to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting a lamb in its first year for a burnt offering, and a pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. He shall offer it before the Lord and make atonement on her behalf. Then shall she be clean from her flow of blood. This is the law for her who bears a child, male or female. If she cannot afford a sheep, she shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering, and the priest shall make atonement on her behalf, and she shall be clean.
Thank you, Mac. And now let's move to, it's very related, very germane to it, chapter 15, verses 19 to 30. Chapter 15, 19 to 30. Someone could pick that up.
I can keep reading if you want.
Okay, Maxine, you're right there. Go ahead.
Okay. When a woman has a discharge of blood, that is her regular discharge from her body, she shall be in her impurity for 7 days, and whoever touches her shall be unclean until the evening. Everything upon which she lies during her impurity shall be unclean. Everything also upon which she sits shall be unclean. Whoever touches her bed shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until the evening. Whoever touches anything upon which she sits shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until the evening. Whether it is the bed or anything upon which she sits, when he touches it, he shall be unclean until the evening. If any man lies with her, and her impurity falls on him, he shall be unclean 7 days, and every bed on which he lies shall be unclean. If a woman has a discharge of blood for many days, not at the time of her impurity, or if she has a discharge beyond the time of her impurity, all the days of the discharge she shall continue in uncleanness, as in the days of her impurity she shall be unclean. Every bed on which she lies during all the days of her discharge shall be treated as the bed of her impurity, and everything on which she sits shall be unclean, as in the uncleanness of her impurity. Whoever touches these things shall be unclean, and shall wash his clothes, and bathe in water, and be unclean until the evening. If she is cleansed of her discharge, she shall count 7 days, and after that she shall be clean. On the 8th day she shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons and bring them to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting. The priest shall offer one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering, and the priest shall make atonement on her behalf before the Lord for her unclean discharge. Thus she shall keep the people of Israel separate from their uncleanness, so that they do not die in their uncleanness by defiling my tabernacle that is in their midst. I think that's what you wanted, right?
It really is. Thank you, Mac. It's kind of very interesting on so many levels. Like it reiterates her uncleanness, and we hear about unclean spirits. So you're dealing with the same phenomenon somehow. But it's just totally remarkable that Jesus was born into this world, and that his parents, as we know, his mother and his father, or his stepfather, brought him to the temple at the time of purification, when his mother would be pure, would be fulfilling this rule of bringing offerings to the priest after childbirth. So there's a connection between childbirth and the uncleanness of menstruation. And Jesus belonged to that world. Now, this woman, well, to begin with, any woman, according to these regulations, would spend about 10 days. I mean, if it's 7 days before you're clean again, you've got to be about 10 days every month when you're going to be unclean. Therefore, you can't go to temple, and you can't let anybody else touch you. You can't let a man touch you. So it means that for basically at least a third of every month, as a woman, you're in a subhuman condition. You don't actually belong to society the same way as men do. And you're actually a kind of problem to that. And that's going to be reinforced at every turn. So this woman who comes out of the crowd, I presume that the onset of, this kind of might unite this woman to the story of the young girl. I would say that the onset of her condition would be the onset of puberty. That I doubt whether it would, the discharge maybe happened at some time afterwards, but it could very well be from the time she started her menstruation. So she would be somewhere in her mid to late 20s, this woman. And she would have been all that time in the condition of an impure person, a person who could not touch or be touched by anyone else, by a man. It doesn't talk about other women, but I assume it'd be the same case. And her bed would render other people impure. It would render her as a source of exclusion in society, the same way as a leper would be excluded. The only advantage she had was this was possibly hidden. That unless people knew of her condition, they would not be aware of it, and would not count her necessarily as impure. And so when the disciples react, when you see the crowd pressing in around you, they kind of they agree with her in terms of the cover that she got from the crowd, but underneath, she was a threat to all of them in terms of this legislation. Now, it is disputed how much this was insisted on by the rabbis at the time. Of course, there'll always be a lot of dispute about this kind of thing. It doesn't really matter. What we know is that it's there in the law, and that it would be the mindset, even if it wasn't applied. It was the mindset, and we know that Jesus' own parents followed that mindset after Jesus' birth. So it's very easy if you want to stigmatize somebody, you've got the law, you've got the rules that allow you to do that. So this woman who emerges from the crowd to touch Jesus is in the same situation as the demoniac man, excluded from normal society, except she's masquerading. She's a kind of a spy, which would make her situation much worse if she were to be found out. So what is it? What are we dealing with in this very strict legislation? Remember that the Jews came out of Egypt and they were given a law by Moses, and the law of Moses was an ethical law to do with how you treat other people, and the Ten Commandments are at the heart of it. And there's other the kind of secondary rules about justice and non-retaliation. The Levitical rules, which are attributed to him, but they're separate, and they seem to be very powerful once the temple is established. You have to go to the priest to come out of your impurity, your uncleanness. So what's at stake there with the emergence? What would you think is at stake with the emergence of this very strict legislation regarding a woman's menstruation and childbirth? You're not forgetting childbirth. What's at stake here? What's going on? What does it mean to put women in these situations? That's what we'd say today. You put a woman in that condition. They wouldn't have thought about that in those terms, and that's just the way it is.
Well, it reinforces the patriarchal order, which was part of the structure of their society, which ultimately flows from the violence of the violent sacred.
So it reinforces the patriarchal order, which puts men in a superior position to women.
Right?
Okay, so that's one element of it.
And there's the whole blood thing, you know, just the blood crying out from the ground in Genesis, Abel's blood crying out, and this sort of this subconscious primal evil kind of fear of humans have of blood, of I mean, we still have it today,
Yeah.
sort of horror.
So why
horror
is blood unclean?
was violence.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's kind of has a violent
Blood
sense
is
to
incredibly scary.
it.
My little daughter Susie, when someone was cut, when she was about 3 or 4, she would say, "He got blood. He got blood." If there was blood on the skin or something, it was like that was the thing that focused her. He got blood.
Well,
Go
blood
ahead.
in one way was unclean, but of course, blood in another way from
I know.
sacrificial animals was purifying.
Yeah, so we have to deal with that, and that's an incredible paradox. Is only explained by violence. But go ahead, Julie.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, all these movies and stuff where they show people in medical school and some of them faint at the sight of blood.
That's right. Blood is primordial for us. I don't know whether animals have the same reaction. I mean, they if they're carnivores, they like it. But we have this instinctual revulsion of blood. And you could make it kind of like mythological. And in the example you give, Julie, of medical students, I mean, it's kind of like a laughing an occasion to laugh at the person's kind of like, I don't know, weakness or superstition or something. But at the same time, it recognizes that this really does happen. People do have this reaction. So the Girardian explanation is the most convincing, I think. It's because the blood signifies violence. So what Linda's saying, blood on the ground, that your brother's blood is crying out to you. Blood signifies violence. And in a pre-scientific world, the issue of blood, the menstrual blood, would be mysterious. I mean, you wouldn't really understand why it's happening. You don't know. They didn't know about the woman's ovum for a long until the 19th century, I think. So it's just a mysterious, weird, perverse, unclean thing that happened to women. And you like women because they're nice, but not when they've got that. Keep them away. So it would have in this legislation, it shows how. I mean, it's great because it shows you how acute that sense is. And it's acute because you're dealing with the possibility, the signal, the metaphor of violence, and violence in the wrong place. It's not where it should be, on the enemy. It's right in the heart of the community. It's in the daughter, in the mother, etc. It's horrifying. And so it's surrounded with this legislation, and the temple controls that legislation. And the temple, at the same time, as Mac conveniently points out, makes use of blood all the time to atone. And because in these stories, you bring the doves or the lamb along and you kill them, and that blood is going to make the blood of the woman okay, or somehow or other, or clean it away, or clean the situation away. So it's kind of it's the devil itself that casts out the devil, kind of thing.
Also, because I think the menstrual blood is all bound up with sexuality. I mean, it's fertility but it's also and childbirth is a sort of whole sexual piece to that as well.
Oh yeah, it comes
So
from
it's
the
seen as, whereas a dove or a lamb or whatever, they're all pure. It's not to do with anything like nasty like that, sex or anything.
Well, one of the reasons why we have a suspicion of sex, it may work the other way around because of the menstrual blood. It may that there's it might be that there's something scary about sex because of the blood. But whatever, they do go together. There's no doubt about it. So this is a demonstration, and this is, I think, that what we're dealing with is human violence, and the symbolisms and the semiotics that blood have regarding violence. Violence is the thing that we're born out of, and that is most scary for us, and that we have to deal with in all sorts of different ways. And if it comes in the body of the woman, then there is this very strict and kind of, as Max says, patriarchal. And you can imagine patriarchy.
Yeah, because if you give birth to a boy, you get less punishment.
33 days for a boy, 66 days for a girl.
Yeah.
And again, that relates to the young girl. There's something inherently more or less pure, more impure about the girl than the boy.
At the same time, we should remember that if a man had a bloody discharge that was ongoing, he would be made unclean by that as well.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so it's just this uncontrolled bleeding that people couldn't control. It's kind of analogous to the violence of the crowd of all against all.
Yeah.
Whereas the sacrificial blood is analogous to the violence of all against one, the good violence that brings the order.
Right. And absolutely right. So what Mac is saying is that the blood of menstruation, and especially the blood here of this woman who's suffered for 12 years, signifies, in Girardian terms, undifferentiation. It signifies the breakdown of all difference and the meaning that comes from difference. But the blood of the single victim restores difference. This victim is the one who is excluded and killed, and that is the generator of the rules that bring difference and differentiation. So you have two very different types of blood, even though it's always blood. You can't cure one without the other. And the curing of the first, which is the breakdown, comes through the victim who is excluded, the single victim. But of course, in the case of the demoniac and the case of this woman, their situation renders them victims in a social and cultural way. They're not victims within the temple order, but they're victims of the cultural order, and they will be treated as such.
And actually, it shows the courage of the woman going into the crowd, because if anyone in that crowd knew her story, they could turn on her, because she's touching all these people. I mean, she's throwing herself into the crowd.
Oh yeah,
where people are touching her all the time, and then she is touching this holy man or this rabbi and making him pure. She's knowingly making him unclean by touching him. So it could have gone very nasty for her.
It could have extremely nasty for her. She could have ended up as the woman taken in adultery. They could have stoned her right there, except Jesus was there. But Julie.
It occurred to me, is there any connection? Jesus felt the power go out of him. Was that because she was unclean, unclean or because she touched him?
No, she was healed.
She was healed. Oh, I see. So the power was the healing power.
That's the healing
I
power.
get it. Thank you.
The generative power in Jesus. I mean,
Okay.
you know, it's very possible that he did feel something, that because the discharge stopped right there. She was made whole.
But he didn't
And-
feel something because she was unclean and
No,
touched
no,
him. I get it.
it was
Thank
the
you.
reverse.
Yeah.
And so that actually that brings us then to Jesus's response. He wants to know who reached out and touched him. He wants to enter into that relationship, and she's scared that although she has been healed, so that's a kind of
Well,
initial.
Jesus is asking the question because he wants to know who had the faith,
Yes,
who believed in him enough
yeah,
to touch him in that way.
yeah.
And she is expecting him to think in the Levitical sense of, so the movement is going the other way. It's so the power is going from Jesus to the woman. It's not that the defilement is going from the woman to Jesus.
Oh, no, not at all. And so what does he say to her? What's his words to her?
Your faith has made you
well.
whole.
Yeah. And then
Go in peace.
Go in
Go in
peace.
With peace.
and be healed. So there's three elements. Your faith has made you whole. That is the relationship you initiated with me. You reach out to start that relationship.
Well, he signals a relationship with the word daughter as well. You know,
Yes,
that is a
yes.
relational term.
Absolutely.
He didn't say woman or
Oh, he says daughter.
you.
So he brings her into the community. She has not been anybody's daughter, presumably, for quite a while. You know, she would have lost her standing in her family. I'm pretty darn sure of that. They wouldn't have had the enlightenment to. Well, unlikely they had the enlightenment to support her through that. So there's three things, and then Ruben, he says, "Your faith has made you whole. Go in peace." Now, go in peace is not just you know, a kind of supernatural formula. It means you're brought into peace. You're brought into divine peace, which is the same as the demoniac. It's the same ministry that Jesus is reaching. Jesus is performing for the Gerasene demoniac and for this woman. Bring you into this world of peace, and you are healed. Go ahead, Ruben.
No, thank you. It's almost like saying Jesus would have said, you are freed from violence.
Yes.
Social and cultural violence, go in
Yes.
peace now. Now you can go in peace, violent free.
Yes.
Anyway,
Exactly
but
right.
my question was, you know how some people say that God is omniscient and knows all and his sovereignty, blah, 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 whatever. So I want to say it respectfully, but my question is this. What difference does it make if Jesus literally said, because he didn't know
Yeah. Right.
me, versus the writers of the Gospel of Mark putting that in for the reader to ponder this dynamic of Jesus building into a relationship with wanting to know who touched, because obviously he already knew if he's omniscient, but that statement, that question, the editors of the gospel included that. I mean, what? Anyway, I just want to, anyone want to
Well,
comment?
I don't think the writer of Mark had it clearly in his mind that Jesus was the eternal Son of the everlasting God, the one substance with the Father. I mean, that doctrine wasn't going to come for another 3 centuries. So I think he's thinking about Jesus very much in terms of his humanity and his relationships. His relationship with the Father, which is, as we always see that it's this intense relationship without barrier, and then his relationships with human beings that communicate automatically what you just said there initially, be freed from a world of violence. That's what they're thinking about. So I think I think the dominant answer to your question, the most likely answer to your question, Ruben, is that the writers, Mark, was thinking about how this sense of relationship without violence went out of him into the woman. He felt when she touched, or he was touched, he was touched by her. That connection, that way of connecting, went from him to someone else. He felt that. And it's a human thing. I mean, I wouldn't put divine omniscience in there. I would say it's a relational human thing, very, very real. And that's the thing that to say that he's God and knows everything throws us off the track of that relational transformation. That's the important thing, is the relational transformation, and the divinity comes second. The declaration of divinity comes second to that. Why is he divine? It's because he does that stuff. He changes our root relationships. That's why he's divine. Dan.
Do you think that if we read this statement, go in peace, as the woman being freed from a world of violence, that world of violence included the way women were made into lepers by this temple obsession with purity? Do you think that this was meant to be a message of liberation from that kind of treatment of women? Is this a kind of a message for us today? Was this a message that signified Jesus' own lack of playing that game of?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's it. I mean, he's not playing that game, if that's the way you put it, and he's playing a completely, and that's the whole point. He's playing it from the let's say the anthropological point of view of the horror of violence and the necessity of prohibitions in order to control it both factually and symbolically, semiotically in our own heads, so that we feel safe. He's not playing that game anymore. It's a completely different order of being human that he's introducing into the world, and that's what kind of answers Ruben's. That's the power that went out of him. That's the sensation that went out of him of, oh yeah, someone is connected with this thing, with what I'm doing.
Is it fair to read this purity business, which turned people basically kind of, as you described it, women became like lepers for a third of every month?
Yeah.
That's a kind of a scapegoating.
Yes, it is. It has its social. That's why patriarchy kind of results from it. Yeah. The women are always going to be inferior for a third of the month. So we have to be in charge.
All the other way around.
Sorry?
All the other way around.
How do you mean?
I mean, we have to be in charge because women are ritually impure, or it could be we want to be in charge, so we're going to say that the women.
Yeah, well, that's true too. I mean, but
Yeah,
human opportunism is always at play. So go ahead, Sheila.
I'm finding it very difficult to understand why a tradition which has so much wisdom would get stuck on this.
It's an excellent question. It is an excellent question, and that's true of Christianity as well. In a general way. Why a tradition with so much wisdom should get stuck on this? For example, not ordaining women, in the Catholic tradition, stuff like that.
We need scapegoats.
We need scapegoats. We do. We do, and impurity helps an awful lot, and we don't even think what impurity is, but whatever it is, it helps an awful lot in creating that scapegoat system. Yes. So Jesus operates by completely, but the answer to your question is, I think, Sheila, is that this thing is 1,000 years old. At the point of writing this, or sorry, experiencing it when the story is first happening with Jesus, the Jewish religion is 1,000 years old plus, 1,200 or something like that. Over time, no matter how much wisdom is in something, it seems to be a kind of rule that default human behavior will creep in because people are comfortable with that. They're comfortable with exclusion, with rules, and with scapegoating, as Dan says. And so it's going to creep in. And I don't think it's by accident that Jesus then ends his career by going to Jerusalem and shutting down the main engine of that default thinking. He doesn't just, if he's healing that woman and he says to her in Reuben's words, go be freed of a world of violence, that implies that he's going to go to Jerusalem in a year's time or something, or whatever, 2 years' time, he's got to go there. He has to.
It's all linked, isn't it?
It's all linked. And so long as he's just bumping into people fairly randomly and doing this stuff, they can tolerate it. But he's like he's going to, when he goes across the lake to meet the demoniac, he's proactive. He carries the battle, so to speak. He carries it to Rome, and before that, he carries it to Jerusalem. And of course, if he goes to Jerusalem, he's going to get killed. So there's something incredibly proactive in Jesus. You know what I'm saying? That he's not passive in any way. Once he's out of the bottle, there's no stopping this thing. And the whole hidden life of Jesus, those 30 years at Nazareth, I mean, he must have been nourishing this transformed relationship, this ability to transform human relationships. He was nourishing him within himself, and then it was opened up. It was released by the baptism. Something happened, but then once he begins, there's no going back. And the very fact that today, in the 21st century, we could read these texts as just incredibly stupid, that the woman's menstruation should render her somehow or other impure. The very fact that we read them with those different eyes is because of him.
Yes.
We didn't get to this by enlightenment.
No.
We're not naturally enlightened, I don't think. And the Enlightenment was stupid to think that it got enlightenment from itself. It was just trading off the enlightenment that it was in the gospel that the church found it difficult to see. But women get the vote, kind of thing. Why? It's because they're twice as dirty as men. So you can't trust them. You can't trust them to vote properly until the end of the beginning of the 20th century, whatever it is. It takes a long time for this stuff to percolate. But
they were still churching women in my mother's time, in the Church of England, at least. They would still have that ceremony. I don't know what the ceremony was, but
sprinkling holy water on them or something. Oh, you're okay now.
They still do. They still have the churching of women in the Greek Orthodox Church.
Yeah.
And my Greek Orthodox friend, when she had her baby, she told me that she was very traditional. I mean, she's first generation American. She said she was not allowed to even go get her hair cut. She couldn't leave her house for 40 days.
Same deal, isn't it? Oh, yeah, that's amazing. You see how slow it is to change these things.
Yeah. And of course, if you think of the primitive, I mean, all the stuff about primitive people where the women have to go off in the hut you know, until their menstrual period is over and all that kind of stuff. It's long standing. It's not just the Jews.
Yeah.
Indeed.
So if the great thing is that we are saying that the same transformation is happening in regard to actual violence, not just the discharge of blood.
Mm.
Violence will create discharge of blood on a massive scale, but we're looking at that in its essence, at its source, not just the horrifying symbolism of it. We're looking at its source. And because things are sped up today, necessarily, I think we're not going to have to wait another 2,000 years before we get to this realization that internecine violence and war itself is as dumb as excluding a woman because of menstruation. I think we'll see that. I mean, the popes basically say that. They try to teach it. Anyhow, we got to finish this bit off now because this is good. We got to get to this girl. And we got to get to the bit afterwards. So the girl is the synagogue leader's daughter, and then somebody comes just after Jesus has said to the woman with the issue of blood, "Daughter, your faith has made you whole. Be freed of a world of violence and be healed of your disease." And then someone says, "Oh, it's too late now. Your daughter, the daughter of the synagogue ruler, is dead." So there's immediate segue from the woman with the issue of blood who is dead but now lives. Oh, but too bad. The little girl, the young girl, has died. But Jesus does not buy that. Exactly as Dan is saying, it's not the game he's playing. It's the same overturning that's taking place with this girl, except that she's not yet excluded, but she's very, very soon to be excluded. We don't know the background story, but she's 12 years old, the same number as the woman with the issue of blood was sick. It's 12 years, and I think that links you to the 12, the number 12. The thing that stands out is the 12 tribes of Israel, 12 apostles. We're dealing with the institutions of Israel that Jesus has come to overturn, just as he goes to the 10 cities. I mean, these numbers are significant of the cultural zones in which Jesus is operating. So he's operating within the Jewish world to get rid. So it goes back to what Sheila is saying, a tradition with so much wisdom should have this in it. Well, he's in the situation now to get that out of the Jewish system. He says, I haven't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. So these rules and these exclusions are not part of the law. In fact, they're these man-made things that encroach back. So this girl who belongs to the same cultural order, he says, no, don't take notice, she's not dead, she's sleeping. So he goes there, and it's really good the way he kind of throws out all the mourners, and you can see the whole village the whole town, because there's a Capernaum, or a lot of them would have gone, berserk, because this young girl just beginning her life had died, and they were, kicking up a fuss about it and weeping and mourning. And we know that grief has an element of anger in it, the element of violence in it. We feel that, when we're grieving, why did this person leave me? I'm angry with them or whatever. It's very difficult for human beings to cut themselves off from that. But what Jesus does is take that out of the equation. He takes the grief out of life. And he excludes them. He says, leave. And I only want 3 people with me because I don't want to make another big hullabaloo here. And he brings them into the company of the where the girl is on the bed. And so again, we know we have this legislation that, as Mac pointed out, you know, that the death would be the same thing, would have the same rendering of the person impure if you touched it. You'd have to wash yourself afterwards. But he goes in there with confidence. And it's a beautiful scene, as Gail pointed out to us at the beginning, that he takes her by the hand. And he reaches out to her. You know, when we reach out to someone with the hand is very important, to hold somebody's hand, to unite your humanity to theirs. He reaches out and he pulls her out of her situation, whatever it is. And he says, little girl, get up. And it's a creation scene. It's the same as God making Adam and Eve in the first place, forming them out of the clay of the ground. But this time, the little girl is already a human being, and he uses a name, Talitha. He calls her by her human name or human identity, and he pulls her out of her death, her coma, whatever it is, her sinking into non-existence, and where violence would have triumphed. And he says, get up. It's a resurrection scene, obviously. And then he says, give her something to eat, which means to say that she's returned to this ordinary earth, the earth of food and water and air, the things we do to live. So it's restoring, it's doing something to creation, it's getting the violence and the death out of creation. And that's what Jesus.
Also what I think it was Cheryl said about it, that she then becomes able to continue the life of the community. So it's the whole biblical thing of Sarah and Rebecca, Rachel, all those people that, you know, they couldn't give birth, but now because death had robbed that from her, she's able to be fully part of the people by becoming, you know, because that was the main, of course, patriarchal society, you know, if a woman doesn't bear children, she's not fully,
she's not human.
You know, not fully,
she's not useful, she's not.
Yeah, I mean, that's the main, you got one task.
Yeah.
And if she can't complete that task, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you've got 20 days in the month, 10 days you're useless, 20 days in the month when you're useful. But then if you can't perform your major task in those 20 days, the whole month is gone. You're useless the whole month. So he turns that around. So I'm just going to finish with the next passage, because we're getting short on time here. But because this is a key part of it, and then we'll think about the kind of entire meaning of the thing. So we read chapter 6, it's a continuation through from verse 1 to verse 6. If someone would read that.
I'll read it.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you.
Leaving that place, Jesus returned to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. When the Sabbath came, he began teaching in the synagogue, and most of those who heard him were astonished. They commented, "How did the man get these things? What is the wisdom that has been given to him, that he even does miracles? Is he not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? His sisters too "Are they not living here among us?" And they took offense at him. Jesus said to him, "Prophets are despised only in their own country, among their relatives, and in their own family." But he could work no miracle there, but only healed a few sick people by laying hands on them. Jesus himself was astonished at their lack of faith.
Thank you, Sheila. So this is a coda. This little episode here is a coda to the stories that have just gone before, which I think go back to the Gerasene demoniac. So Jesus has done all these powerful things, and what is the response of his own community of Nazareth? And how do they react to them? And it says they take offense. They're offended by him. Why would people be offended by this? I mean, that's the Gospel of Mark has given these wonderful episodes of inclusion from exclusion and peace from violence, the end of war, the end of oppression of one sort or another, bringing people in who are out, making them daughters when they were no longer daughters. Why are people offended at that? Why does it provoke, if you do that kind of stuff, why does it provoke offense?
I think it's like he did in the temple where he's overthrowing the money changers' tables. He's turning things over, and they don't like that.
They don't like that.
He's coming from the inside. An outsider can be listened to, but an insider is just the same person you saw in your family growing up. I'm sorry, I must not be loud enough. But he's speaking as an insider, and
He's speaking as a what, sorry?
as an
Insider.
Insider.
instead of an outsider. And so the voice of an insider does not have much power. That's all. It's someone that is just part of the community, grown up in the community. That person has no power. And
Okay.
whereas
So he is an insider, but he's got this strange power.
right. The other thing I wanted to just, if I could go back for just a little bit, I've been thinking
Yeah, go ahead.
about,
Go on.
let me see if I can be louder if I can be, I don't know. Is that the story of the raising the girl from the dead is, to me, it's a cruel story. It's a cruel story because none of our daughters or sons get raised from the dead like that. Our children or the children of people all over the world who are dead because of the violence heaped upon them, they don't get raised like that. They don't get brought back so that they can be loved. And so sometimes these stories to me are meaningful, but also cruel. They're also cruel. They've lasted all this time, and we can be in awe that the young 12-year-old girl was brought back to life in this resurrection story. But so how does that relate to our lives in which this does not ever happen? It does not happen.
Well, I would dispute that it never happens.
Okay,
No,
well, okay.
never say never. You don't know, and there are miracles in life, I mean, physical miracles, but that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about the change of state of these people. And I mean, you're right in as much as that historically, I don't think the world has learned these lessons. I think the world has learned the lesson of the status of women politically. I mean, there's not argument, there can't be argument about that, and there can't be argument about the fact that the gospel has had some role in that, has had some provocative role in bringing women from 2/3 status to full status, you know?
But my point is that this is a story of great comfort. The synagogue leader came to Jesus, said, "My daughter is sick, just come touch her." And yes, there are miracles that happen, but more than often not. and we are left with real life in which the daughter dies or the son dies. I'm not even talking gender here. We are left with real life and given a story about a girl that was raised from the dead, and just like Lazarus, a man that was raised from the dead. You know, how do these stories comfort us at a
I
time
think
when?
I think
Go ahead.
I hear what you're saying, but I think what they have is the sign value, the symbol value,
Right.
that they have a tremendous sign value. So Jesus obviously he didn't have the capability at that time to heal or to bring everyone
Well,
back
I mean,
from the dead at that point.
and you don't want to do that because
No,
that
no,
becomes
no,
magic.
because that's right. But I'm saying that what he did, each of the miracles that are recorded, or the healings that are recorded, have a deeper significance than the actual event of themselves, you know. So so that the comfort we get from them is not that, like my sister at the moment in England, she has ALS and she's sort of dying basically by degrees, and there's nothing that we can do, and I'd love to have someone come in and just heal her, but I know that that's not going to happen. But there's still a comfort that we can find in these stories. And I thank God that I have the gospel in this situation where I'm in. I thank God that I can talk to my sister about that Jesus came as a healer, and not that he's going to heal her of what she's got in terms of disease, but she can find healing and joy and even blessing in her situation because of Jesus, you know, and the fact that he came as a healer is something that, I mean, he claims a lot of different titles, and I spoke about this before. You know, he appropriates the Son of Man from Daniel, and Joseph from Genesis, and Jonah, and all these different figures, Lady Wisdom. But the sort of thing that makes him unique in a way, when you can compare him to the Old Testament, there isn't a whole bunch of healings in the Old Testament. Yeah, that's front and center for Jesus. He comes as a healer because we're in such desperate need of healing on so many different levels of our violence, of, us in the world today. We need healing more than we need anything else. And so the fact that he comes to us as a healer is enormous for me. And it doesn't mean necessarily that everything is going to be squeaky clean and perfect in terms of health and wellness in disease, like biologically, but it's more to do with something deeper than that, something spiritual, and also the sign value and the witness of it all. If you can make sense of any of that.
It points forward to the way the world can be and will be as it is transformed, as we give up violence and relate to one another in love.
Sheila.
Yes, and I think also it's very symbolic in the sense that he's giving us a new life. A new creation in Christ, the new life, the new way of being.
Yeah, yes, Cheryl. I mean, I actually hear the crying and the mourning and the sadness of all those children who've died in hospital or out of hospital in car accidents or in Gaza at the moment, in the bombing at Gaza. I mean, they're shredded. People, young kids are blown to pieces and they're not healed. But what's important is kind of what just to refer to what both Linda and Mac are saying, is that there's another relationship brought into the world. You see, if you remain in the relationship, that death rules, and it's going to rule in the case of young girls, young boys, babies, fathers, mothers who are needed by their families. They're cut down somehow or other. Death rules. And you can begin to live your life according to that relationship of the rule of death. And of course, that's going to bring more death. If you live by that relationship, there'll be more death in the world, and in your own life. But if someone brings into the world a new relationship, that's what Sheila is saying. Is the offering, so it's a matter of faith, it's a matter of being touched by this new life. It's not that every sick girl is going to be healed. That's not the point. It is the point sometimes, I'm sure of that. I mean, I've seen it, I know it's happened. But the bigger point is that we live in this new relationship, in this restored, transformative relationship that ultimately will do what Mac is saying, is going to make the world new. That's what Jesus. So when Jesus says your faith has saved you, or your faith has made you well, made you whole, that's what he means. He doesn't mean to say, oh, you've got that ticket of you've got this faith ticket in me. No, you've entered into this relationship. And that's the power of what he's doing. He's bringing this transformative relationship, which is unknowable outside of him. You can't get it unless you relate to him, unless you reach out and touch his cloak. You have to bust your way through the crowd and grab onto the hem of his garment. That's what this is about. It's about the transformative relationship. And whatever situation, whatever you've endured in life, if that transformative relationship, if you welcome it into your soul, into your heart, then the meaning of everything else has changed. That's the gospel. Okay, so on that note, we should end. Would someone like to pray for us to finish our meeting? We always have a blessing at the end. Someone bless us. Oh,
do you want me
is it
to?
Laura? Laura, you're winding up to bless us. Thank you so
Great.
much.
I'm back.
You're back.
Our Father in heaven, we're so grateful for this evening and for this class where we can learn more of thy desires and ways, and that we can become closer to thee. We're grateful for each other and for this beautiful world that thou hast provided for us. Please bless us that we might be mindful of others at all times, that we can set an example and help our brothers to also know of your love for them. And these things we pray in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Laura. God bless everyone. Peace. The next week, we're doing the open mic, and we're going to begin with a discussion on Palestine, and then we're going to talk about Girardians.
So you can bring anything, anyone has anything that is on their heart about the violence
I
that's
don't want
going
this to
on.
become, this is for us as a community, right? I don't want someone just to come to the meeting because we're going to be talking about Girardians.
My problem is I don't know enough about the Hebrew scriptures to know. Well, I know superficially what they are balancing, what they are using to take over all of this land.
Oh yeah. Well, we'll talk about that. We will talk about that, Sheila.
Yeah, I hope so.
So we have two hot topics, really.
But basically, just to remember, if we're going to talk about a hot topic like Palestine and Gaza or whatever, anything that's just to remember this is a safe space, that if someone's not quite thinking politically or the same way as you, you just listen to them and it's okay. That's a safe space.
Will
Yeah,
it
go
be
ahead,
recorded? Will it be recorded for YouTube?
I don't think I'm not going to send it out. It won't go on the YouTube channel, no, but it will go out to the group for people who've missed it. Because I think when we're sharing like this, you have to feel confident that you can be, if you're grappling with something and you can't get your mind straight, sometimes you need a sounding board, and it's okay. And we're not to be down on anyone for whatever reason, but it's important to also talk about this stuff too, to get clarity. Okay.
Yes.
Quickly,
All right.
I want to, I just feel a little bit of uncomfortableness, but I want to let Cheryl know that her question, I respect it so much,
Yeah.
and her honesty and rawness, I really respect that. And
Yeah, I could feel the pain actually. I don't know what your story is, but I could feel that there is some kind of pain behind that response as well. So it was good that you shared that.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Ruben, for saying that. It was in my mind too. Okay. All right, folks. See you next week.
Good
Bye-bye.
night.
bye.
Good morning.
Yeah.
Good night.
Bye bye, everybody. Linda, I just want